The Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Buerkle.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, and thank you all for being here this morning for this very important discussion. I always thought it was just a bit counterintuitive that we would take $1 trillion out of the private sector and give it to the government to redistribute back to the private sector with all sorts of strings attached, and hope that it would help our economy and job creation. So I guess my first question, I'll just refer to something that the gentleman from Ohio mentioned regarding the tax rates and continuing the tax rates and what they add to the deficit, because that's something we hear as an excuse or a reason not to extend the tax rates from 2001 and 2003. I'd like you to comment on that before we get into the stimulus a bit.
So I think the agreement to extend the tax rates that are in the law currently is a very important stimulus to the economy. Economics tells us the more permanent changes like that, something that's been in the law for a while, is much more beneficial until people's spending decisions and investment decisions. I would like to see that extended even further. I think that would be quite beneficial and a good stimulus, more beneficial than the temporary types of changes people have proposed.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Dr. Roberts?
Well, I think it's important to remember that we cut tax rates, and that had a stimulating effect that Professor Taylor is talking about. But if you cut revenues and you don't cut spending, all you've done is substitute taxes tomorrow for taxes today. And I think the single most important thing that Congress can do now is to cut spending, because that is an implicit tax on the private sector. We spend way too much money through the government sector. We need to spend less.
Thank you. Dr. Foster?
I agree with Dr. Taylor that it's terribly important that we extend for a much more longer period of time, if not make permanent, the tax relief that was enacted under President Bush. That uncertainty about the outcome of that policy had a major depressive effect on the economy last year. And those decisions will feed on into next year. It reduced investment, which is going to be a driver going forward. But it is also terribly important to get the spending down now. That is probably at this stage the most stimulative policy that we can enact to get spending under control, the deficit down, reassure credit markets that we do intend and will get our fiscal house in order.
Thank you. My next question, and it's to all three of you again, do you think that the economy would have improved and would have recovered without the stimulus? Dr. Taylor?
Yes, I think in fact, the beginnings of the recovery preceded the stimulus. When you look at the factors in the economy that drove the increase in growth, there are private investment, also net exports, not really the government purchases. So very much so, I think that in fact, at this point in time, you can point to the stimulus and related reasons for the higher debt as holding back the strength of the recovery at this point. It has been disappointing, especially last year. We hope it's picking up. But I think it would have been better without this kind of a stimulus.
Thank you. Dr. Roberts?
The only thing I would add to that is the funneling of money, Federal tax money, to the States encourages their misbehavior. I think it's extremely important that people who live beyond their means learn to change their behavior. And we continue to enable that, and we just push off the date of reckoning down the road. I think that's irresponsible, and I think we ought to be changing those incentives.
Thank you. Dr. Foster?
As I testified, I believe we could have enacted stimulus that would have helped. But the President chose a different path. He chose a path that was not going to be effective because you do not add money to the economy by first taking money out of the economy. And that's the fundamental flaw of the theory. And thus, I think, on balance, we would have been better off. At best, this policy did no harm, at best.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll get to this. My time is soon to expire. I'd like to hear from all three of you regarding what your recommendations are to grow our economy and to really get at the root of this problem. What can we do as a Congress to help improve the economy of the United States?
The three things, and this is before the stimulus. First is to make sure we're not going to increase tax rates. It is not necessary to do that to deal with the deficit, and it would be beneficial to growth. Second, lay out a plan to get the debt explosion over with. We have projections by CBO of debt just skyrocketing. Lay out a plan so they score it to come back down to reasonable levels. That will be reduce uncertainty, give people faith back in our government. And third, I think it's important to address this